Another carry for Dotson.
Do it again. Do it again.
Touchdown.
Want to watch football without the restrictions of blackouts or cable? Check out expressvpn.com to help you get access to all the live games. Sign up today using the link in the description to get 3 free months.
Yo to Bolt fam, it's the director. Chargers fans, after last week's epic win over the Los Angeles Rams, I am sure every Chargers fan out there is hungry to get to the next preseason game, guys. That was probably the most entertaining preseason game that I can remember as a Chargers fan, and it left me hungry, bro. I know it left a lot of other Chargers fans hungry to get to the next one. Fortunately for us, the next Chargers preseason game just around the corner. Chargers versus New Orleans Saints coming up on Saturday. Of course, we will be live for that game like we are every single week, and it is going to be one of those unique games where we have actually held a joint practice with this team prior to playing them in the preseason, so we already got kind of a little bit of a preview of what to expect this week. Now, we're going to go ahead and break down this game, add some things that we think the Chargers probably should be focusing on versus the Saints to improve their game on what we saw from last week. But let's be honest, last week, that was as fun as a preseason game can get. I still do think there's some stuff that the Chargers can improve on and focus on with some specific players, as well as also giving us a nice line in on what the actual season could look like. So it should be a pretty good time, guys. Before we do get started, of course, let's go ahead and give a shout out to our sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. With the season officially just around the corner, preseason already here, now is the best time to jump in on Underdog Fantasy, the best fantasy platform on the web. Get your feet wet with some picks, guys. They're also doing this awesome thing this season that I absolutely love called season picks. So basically you put in like what you think their stat is going to be for the entire season. So Justin Herbert, I got over 30 passing yards with 30 and a half. Of course, we think that with the Kellen Moore. We got Keenan Allen with 2.5 games of 100 plus receiving yards. I think that's absolutely something he's going to pass. And then you do have to throw in one player from a different team. So I put in Calvin Ridley in there. We're higher than more than 7.5 receptions. Should be a very fun time. So get it on there for the season-long picks, for the pick'em, some of my favorite things on Underdog. If you guys want to jump in on the action, use code DIRECTOR to match your first deposit up to $100. Before we do jump in, guys, hit us up with a like and sub. If you do enjoy this Chargers content, small amount of time you guys take to hit the like, sub, and bell notification helps me out a lot. Let's jump into it. Lights, camera, action. Your Chargers versus Saints game preview for week 2 of the preseason, aka week 2, the next Kellen Moore sizzle reel moment. The more highlights we get from Kellen Moore. That's going to be the first topic of our conversation in this video today. Most of the time we do start with injury news, etc., etc. We don't officially have that right now, so we're going to jump into our first topic. This one called Run It Back Kellen. Okay, I think one of the biggest things, if you were to highlight some of the points I was making from last week's game, is that I am extremely impressed with what this offense looks like. And it really does feel like the last game was just a love letter from Kellen Moore to the fans, like, hey guys, you are in good hands. And honestly, again, the last game, absolutely stellar. I'm pretty sold at this point. This is also a combination from what we saw and heard in the offseason, but getting to see it in live action last week was a treat. And a lot of this was actually behind what a lot of us were surprised to see, a fantastic run game. The Chargers over 200 yards, maybe well over, right, last week. That is something that I think a lot of us needed to see from this team. In order to have an offense that's going to be successful in the long term, you're going to have to get that run game going, and it does seem that Kellen Moore has made that a focus of his offseason, and honestly, it paid off so beautifully last week. Are we going to see us Kellen Moore run it back, quite literally, this week? Now, the Saints, they only gave up 83 yards last week to the Kansas City Chiefs, but let's be honest, the Chiefs, they don't really run it that much. They're more of a strictly passing team. They're almost allergic to running the football. This week, the Chargers certainly are going to try and run versus the Saints. We're going to hope to get that, yardage up from what the Saints, or I should say, from what the Saints were able to allow last week. Okay, now this week, of course, Chargers fans excited to see The trio of running backs, I would say, that we've got kind of highlighted for the preseason, back in action, back at work. Of course, I would say the top two guys we still need to consistently see some more production out of are going to be Joshua Kelly and Isaiah Spiller. Those two guys obviously are going to be making the 53, right? They need to be part of that team as the backups of Austin Eckler. I would love to see, in terms of these guys, Isaiah Spiller actually get that touchdown that was taken away from him last week. What was it, like a 70, 80? I think it was a 71-yard touchdown stricken back from a penalty. Would love to see him get that one back. But of course, I do want the Chargers and its fans to also recognize the talent of a Joshua Kelly, who I think is going to be the RB2 for this team. The more I see him out there, the more I kind of understand what his role is going to be. And the more I'm very comfortable with the Chargers, rounded out running back room. I feel like Joshua Kelly, Isaiah Spiller, they're going to be great. The top two backs, they should definitely see some snaps to continue cementing their role in this game. But I have a feeling that that's probably not the running backs you guys are tuning in to see on Saturday, right? I think there's one running back in particular that captured the hearts and imaginations of the Bolt fam, and he happens to wear number 42, Elijah Dotson, the man with the moves, the man with the putting the guys on skate, everything. I feel like there was a lot of surprise from the Bolt fam, from Chargers fans, from NFL fans, from what we saw in Elijah Dotson last week. This guy looks special, right? And I think it also stems from the fact that the Chargers do have a history in finding success with undrafted free agents, and it feels like they may have stumbled on another one with Elijah Dotson. This guy put on some moves last week, some moves that were reminiscent from some of the Chargers' greats. Now, again, we're not saying he's going to be a Darren Sproles, certainly not a LaDainian Tomlinson, but it was hard to not see the resemblance in those cuts, in the way he moved, in the way he, hit to the outside and took it all the way to the house. It felt reminiscent of some of the best Chargers running that we've seen, especially even in the preseason. We want to see if that's something that is sustainable for number 42. We want to see if that's something that he can do consistently to help him in his case of making the roster. Because of course the Chargers already are going to have, 3 running backs on the roster, and in Austin Eckler, of course, RB1, RB2, and Joshua Kelly, and then of course Isaiah Spiller at RB3. Is there room for Elijah Dotson? I think he can make a case for himself, and I think if he can put out another really solid performance this week, it'll only help his case in making the roster. Sure, the Chargers are going to have to make some moves in order to have that happen, but at this point, it feels like week 1, he's starting to make himself known. I think week 2, you followed it up with proving the consistency can be there. I think he can replicate it this week. I think he's going to see plenty of opportunities like he did last week. Of course, now Chargers fans bit more optimistic in his chances now that Roundtree has been let go from the roster, from the team, I should say. I think that ups the chances of Elijah Dotson, and I do think he's going to have more opportunity this week, even than he did last week, which is kind of crazy, to put up some numbers to help his case. So Elijah Dotson, excited to see him get out there. Next topic. This one's called QJ Jet Fuel. Okay, maybe a redemption sort of opportunity for Quentin Johnston. Maybe a redemption's actually too big of a word for this, right? Quentin had a solid week last week. Of course, went over the middle there for that touchdown. That is something that we definitely need to see more improvement of on the Chargers as a whole. What does their red zone presence look like? And Quentin Johnston, like we're seeing here from the joint practice, this man knows how to come down with some crazy catches, right? One-on-one, man, I'm hilarious. One-on-one in this photo. I actually don't know if it came down with this one. I'm pretty sure they did if they put the photograph on their website. Either way, we got a nice weapon for the red zone all of the sudden, okay? Now I kind of want to see a bit of consistency from the catching, right? I feel like the few drops from his last game kind of left fans wondering, like, what's going to happen? Is he going to be consistent in season? Is this something that's going to be a problem in season? I was reading that a couple of those drops were definitely not on Quentin Johnston, but they read on the stat line that way anyway. But for the most part, it is something that we kind of knew would be a concern coming into this season, and it's something that fans would love to see alleviate in terms of their worry, of their concern on that. And I think that QJ could certainly do that in this game versus the Saints. The Saints did give up a lot of yards last week to the Chiefs, of course, who are a very good passing team. Almost 300 yards. 300 yards to the backups of the Kansas City Chiefs. Are the Chargers on par now in terms of, offensive system, offensive scheme to sort of kind of do what the Chiefs are doing in terms of, statage? I think honestly, yeah. I think honestly Quentin or Kellen Moore can be regarded in a similar fashion in terms of that offense, at least from what we've seen so far. Now, a combination of Quentin Johnston, Kellen Moore, Are we going to see, that kind of yardage racked up again? I would like to see it, and I would like to see the Chargers, in particular Quentin Johnston, be part of that recipe. So I think this is a great opportunity for QJ to rack up maybe 3-4 receptions in his follow-up game in the preseason, hopefully for some big plays. But if anything, I would like to see that catching improve in this game, even if he only gets a couple opportunities in a drive or two. All right. But speaking of wide receivers, there was another star last week that Chargers fans were excited to see get to work. That was our guy, Darius Davis, and the depth, okay? Now, Darius Davis, I think this is a great opportunity for him and the depth for the Chargers to show off a little bit as well, again, because the Chiefs were, able to rack up 300 yards in the preseason through the air. That's absolutely fantastic. I think it was just through passing, which is definitely something. And Davis, I feel like, should be our first highlight in featuring some of that depth that the Chargers all of a sudden have at the wide receiver position, right? I know that we're all hoping to see some special teams work from number 12. We saw that huge touchdown last week, which was mega hype. I don't know if that's part of the equation for making last week such an entertaining game for the Chargers and its fans. But honestly, his usage as a receiver, I think that's very much anticipated by me. And I know it's going to be by a lot of Chargers fans as well, because we only saw 2, targets for Davis in that first game, but they showed off some very promising, characteristics from Davis as a receiver, as well as, as a special team, obviously, but as a receiver. I want to see more work from Davis. Proving to me that he can run crisp routes, right? Showing solid hands. I think if he can do that again, we're in business. Because again, the only 2 receptions he had as a receiver last week, he showed great hands to me, coming down with, a pretty difficult catch through contact, as well as the ability to get open underneath and then just sprint, whether it be for a touchdown, sideline, whatever, to rack up those extra yards because of that speed. That speed was on full display. I want to see more of Davis as a receiver this week. Of course, I do expect to see him get some special teams opportunities, but let's throw him an extra, opportunity or snap or 2 at the receiver position as well. I'd love to see more of him on display because, like I said last week, guys, and let's not get ahead of ourselves, but, Tyreek Hill also started as an option for the Chiefs, being drafted as a returner with a little bit of upside as a wide receiver. Who's to say that we're not going to see something similar in number 12? All right, so Danger Davis, excited for him. Outside of Darius Davis, we do have some other guys to definitely pay attention to. We're going to see some chicken parm out there this week. The tight end position maybe could get a little bit more involved. I know that we saw a reception for, chicken parm last week as well. Maybe get the other backups a little bit more involved as well from the tight ends. But maybe that's not as important as what we have at the receiver position in terms of depth, right? Now, of course, you got, Mike Williams standing there, but who's there on the right side of him? I'm pretty sure that's John Hightower, right? I think he wears number 84 with us. I would love to see him get some action, right, this week. I would love to see that speed on display. He may not suit up. I don't know what the status is of his injury right now. He may not be out there, but if he does suit up, Chargers fans are going to get their first look at his game speed. Okay, we've been seeing that speed in practice. We've been seeing him, kind of be that standout dude in the offseason. Would love to see that kind of put to work in this live game environment. Of course, don't throw him out there if he isn't healthy. But that's, just one of the guys in terms of our depth that the Chargers fans should look out for. Other guys like, Pokey Wilson, Keelan Doss, who's been kind of a standout guy as well. I think Terrell Bynum was the other guy that we saw get a few targets last week as well. These are guys that we should certainly look out for too. The depth is going to get some opportunity this week, I have a feeling, because if anything, Easton Stick looked fantastic. I would expect him to see a lot of time this week as well. Max Duggan, he's going to need a little bit more time to get his footing, but certainly he has some potential to. Keep an eye out for those guys. The quarterbacks are going to give these guys some opportunities. Keelan Doss, Pokey Wilson, Tyro Banham, Darius Shepard, look out for him too, and Milton Wright are some of the names to monitor. Okay. Next up, let's talk a little bit of defense, and it's going to be from a player that right now, it kind of depends on who you ask, Chargers fans may be excited for or maybe a little bit upset with, right? I think all of us should be a little bit upset with him, but at the same time, there's some potential here. Now, of course, this segment called JT's Redemption, okay? Unlike QJ, I think redemption's a pretty appropriate word here, okay? Last week, I got to tell you, though, I saw some great stuff from JT Woods. Not like stellar, not like, oh my God, we got a star at safety, but I saw some big improvements in contrast from what we saw last year. Last season's JT Woods was horrible. The man couldn't cover spit, right? It was bad. It was really, really bad. For sure, he had the speed and he had the size, but he looked really lost out there, a liability in coverage. This year, I'm starting to see some pretty good signs of improvement in terms of his coverage ability, in terms of his positioning and play rec and ball hawking ability. It feels like JT Woods has turned his first corner, right? I think he's got more development, to go through in the future. But right now, it looks pretty good. It looks pretty good. Unfortunately, what most fans are only going to remember from last week is going to be that bone-headed penalty that we saw. The PI, or I should say unsportsmanlike conduct, that resulted in a touchdown for the Rams. Very unfortunate, because if you wipe away that boneheaded decision by JT, I think most fans would have walked away from that game saying, hey, man, there's some hope. There's some hope for the young player. There's some hope for JT Woods. I think we saw some good things. But unfortunately, because of that decision, a lot of Chargers fans aren't going to remember him that way in the first game. And that penalty, by the way, penalties as a whole, that topic, that subject applies to the Chargers as a whole. I think the Chargers well over 100 yards in penalties, right? We've got to clean that up in this game. Something kind of underlying to also pay attention to. Now, JT Woods' status is especially important because there is a bit of a rumor. I don't know how much weight it holds, but we don't know Alohi Gilman's status right now in terms of health, right? It may be precautionary, them holding him out, whatever. But who knows? Who knows? They might have to call on JT to be that guy opposite Derwin James. And then who's picking up that backup role? Probably one of the other guys. A safety like Finley or Raheem Lane or Mark Webb, who's also having some injury concerns right now. But especially important this week to monitor the safety position, right? The backups, everything like that. It's going to be especially important for the Chargers to feel comfortable in that. Fans need to feel comfortable in that. And I think JT Woods will have another opportunity to prove to Chargers fans that we have a capable guy to step in JT Woods. All right. Next topic, this one called defensive line domination. Now, last week, the defensive line was especially impressive. Okay. And that's one of those topics where I needed to see something. Chargers run defense has been no bueno for a couple of seasons, right? Then we got injuries to throw on top of it. Quentin Johnston, injured. Tito, injured. Fayoko, gone. He's a Steeler now, right? Chargers needed to see something in terms of their depth at defensive line, and boy, did we see it, right? Held the Rams to under 100 rushing yards, which is absolutely fantastic. Added 4 sacks on top of that, and we saw a lot of standouts all over the place. Jared Clark, this man here, Scott Matlock, right? I think Brevin Allen, Andrew Farmer. These guys, there's just a whole bunch of names that you wouldn't really, give a second thought to that were really standing out versus the Rams. And I was very, very impressed. Let's see them run it back. Let's see them run it back this week, right? The defensive line, I would like to see, the same guys go out there and make an impact like Matlock, right? Like Allen. But maybe we feature more play from a few guys that only got a smaller sample last week, right? Let's get this man involved a little bit more. CJ Okoye, remember this guy last week, man? I think his first play, he gets a sack. Chargers sideline going absolutely crazy. He looks huge, and he looks really fast for his size as well. He looked fantastic. I want to see more CJ Okoye, right? Now, realistically, in the regular season, he might be more of a practice squad guy because of all of a sudden all the depth we have all over the line, but maybe not, right? The good news as of right now, like I mentioned with the injuries, Quentin Johnston's kind of back, right? I think he's working his way back in from injury. I think he had his first practice. Was it just this morning or yesterday? I don't remember. Either way, good sign. Good sign. Quentin Johnston, perhaps our best run defender. But there might still be some room for a guy like CJ Okoye. There's a lot of guys fighting for a spot right now, man. Let's see some more from the guys that got less work last week, including CJ. As for the edge position, it looked awesome last week, right? 4 sacks in your very first week. Looked great. And it came from a flurry of different Chargers. I would like to see our second round pick a little bit more involved this week. Not that he wasn't great. He was awesome when given the opportunity, generating a couple of pressures, looking really, really nice out there. Chargers edge rotation looks so healthy all of a sudden. But I just kind of want to see a little bit more of him in game speed, kind of see how he's rounding out with the rest of the team. Of course, be precautionary. You don't want to get anybody hurt out there, but maybe an extra drive or two this week would definitely help. I would say Thule in getting into game speed as well. He looks great, right? As a whole, though, the Chargers, if they can produce another 3 to 5 sacks this week, I think we're really in business in terms of our depth, okay? Because, again, Thule didn't get a sack last week. He only got a couple of drives in, right? Despite that, we still got 4 sacks from all over the roster. We're looking pretty good, okay? Quick note, too, speaking of linebacker, I would like to see more Ranger, please. That's all I'm going to say. Let's see a little bit more Ranger. We saw a couple other linebackers step up and make an impact. What was the other guy? Lynch, right? They got the other player that we got from the Minnesota Vikings. He also looked kind of nice. There was a couple linebackers back there that looked pretty good. I would like to see a little bit more. Dan Henley, he looked okay. He looked pretty good in his first season debut in the preseason. But maybe even throw out a little bit of Kenneth Murray, because although he is a starter right now, I would still like to see him prove it a little bit, even in the preseason. Okay, even in the preseason. To get close to wrapping up this video, a couple more segments here. This second to last one called DB Bounce Back. One big thing that I think the Chargers should hope to see and its fans this weekend is going to be a little bit of improvement from the defensive backs. And that coming from, I would say, guys like Jasir Taylor. Dean Leonard looked pretty solid last week, too. We had a couple of drop picks, though. I want to see an interception this game, right? I think their main quarterback, what was his name? Hayner, I think, was the Saints quarterback. I think he did throw a pick last week. I want to see the Chargers generate a pick this week, maybe via one of these guys too. I want to see that, hey man, they've pretty much. I feel good about them in their positioning. I feel good about them in their coverage, especially for backups. Let's see them fix those hands a little bit, because 2 drop picks within a span of like a minute or 2 in game time, that was really discouraging to see. But of course, that's something that they can clean up. I would love to see the Chargers prove that with an interception. As well as we also need to see the Chargers improve their play as we get deeper in terms of the depth. Right now, a lot of these guys are not going to see the roster, of course, but we saw corners like Tywin Mullen, who I had a lot of hope for. He was getting picked on a lot, man. He was giving up a lot of yardage. What was the other guy's name? Uzadima, I think is how you say it. He was also getting picked on quite a bit. Now, this is, again, kind of the bottom of the depth chart right now. These guys may not make the roster, but to see some improvement there would definitely go a long way. My money is definitely on still the year 2 guys, Leonard and Taylor. I think those guys certainly can put on a show this week to pretty cement themselves into the Chargers' backup roles. All right. Lastly, a little kind of word in on the Saints. What are we looking at, Director? What are we looking at? The Saints, they've got some pieces, right? They got some pieces. We might see a brief outing by Derek Carr. Jameis Winston as well should see a little bit of action if it's to repeat last week. But I would expect to see a lot of Jake. I think, again, it's Hayner is how you say his name. He threw 100 yards, touchdown, and an interception last week. I think we're going to see a lot of him. But their run game is definitely not too bad, led by Jamal Williams. You guys remember him. He was somebody I was hoping the Chargers would pick up in the past. Ellis Merriweather, I think, as well, is going to be there. Those guys are okay. But the receivers are pretty solid, I will say. They got Perry. I know he caught 6 balls, 70 yards, and a score. He's something the Chargers got to look out for. Familiar names, especially with Derek Carr, and Brian Edwards, right? Quentin Johnston, we've seen him for the past couple seasons with the Saints. Those guys should see some snaps. The receivers look pretty nice. And as for their defense, they got some nice pieces all over. Zach Bond, Ty Summers, I think both those guys got sacks last week. And then Kyle Phillips ended up getting an interception as well. So Saints definitely not pushovers. Chargers are going to have their work cut out for them. But I think last week being the week of the run, I want to see that return, but I also want to see this week be more highlighted by the pass, given with the Chargers' depth at wide receiver, as well as the particular opponent they're going up against. I think the Chargers can flex that a little bit this week, and I would like to see a little bit more of that. So to give you guys my official game prediction here, or to say score prediction, I got the Chargers taking on the Saints here. Chargers 28, Saints 17. A lot of this has to span with what the Chargers did last week. Also what we're seeing in joint practice right now. The defense has looked so good for the Saints in the joint practice so far. And if the offense can kind of keep pace with what they did last week, I think they're good to put up multiple scores once again. Let's keep it rolling, Brandon. I know that we hadn't had a lot of success before last week in terms of the preseason. Let's give the Chargers fans and the team a bit of momentum going into the year, right? This is a great encore game from last week. But a big test is going to be if this team can carry its momentum. In years past, it's been really tough to carry that. Even in the preseason, I think it's important. And if we see the same efficiency, especially from the offense like we did last week, I think we can only assume that this team is going to take a drastic step forward in the regular season as well. So it should be a pretty good time. In the comment section, leave your guys' score predictions as well. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. This has been The Director. If you liked what you saw here, hit us up with a like and sub on your way out. As a quick preview as well, the channel may look a little bit different in the the coming weeks. I have a couple of ideas in terms of transforming the look a little bit before their kickoff in the regular season. So keep an eye out for that as well. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. This has been The Director. We'll see you next time. And as always, bolt up, stay frosty, and let's see some speed out there this Saturday. Darius Davis, Danger Davis is what we're going to start calling you.